Hello, my name is Mike. Welcome to your guided tour of the Cliffs of Moher. We're going to head on up to OBriens Tower, then the main platform, and then up for the finale up to the southern platform, and maybe do a little bit of bird spotting later on. And with me today, my guides and your guides are the lovely Bridget, the lovely Ciara, Gerard, another Gerard, and Colm. So come on up and join us. Have a fantastic day, and remember, social distancing is very important, so always stay 2 meters apart. Enjoy.
Now, music and busking at the Cliffs of Moher has been a tradition going back for generations, back to the time of when Cornelius O'Brien entertained his guests up at the cliffs. He'd have a piper play outside. And then in more recent time, before this centre was built, or as many people were coming here, you had a local man, Denny McMahon. He came back from the States, he played a whistle, he came up here, he played his whistle, he told stories to the visitors, he traded, he sold blackthorn sticks and tin whistles and all that, and it was an added atmosphere. And up to this day you have buskers in different places. This is the number one place, starting closest to the visitor centre, Buskers Pitch 1, where you have 10 whistle players, maybe fiddle players, harpists, accordion players, singers, and it adds to the atmosphere for the visitor here at the cliffs. And with the wind blowing in from the sea, sometimes you might be over in the car park and you'd hear the music coming with the acoustics. You wouldn't know where it was coming from, but it really adds to the atmosphere here.
So I'm here next to OBriens Tower. Now, OBriens Tower was built in 1835 by a local landlord called Cornelius O'Brien. Now, Cornelius O'Brien was quite a wealthy man. He owned 10,000 acres of land, and that's a huge amount of land for someone to own back then. And he lived just down the road from the cliffs down to the south in a place called Birchfield House. So throughout his life he was very familiar with the cliffs and saw great potential here for tourism. So he decided to build this tower. Now, many people think this tower might have been a lighthouse or maybe for military purposes, but it was technically called a folly. And a folly was a place for entertainment. So Cornelius O'Brien, being a high status man of his generation, a member of Parliament, had many friends in business and politics, and he'd bring special guests up here for singing and dancing and wining and dining. Now, this was all around the time of the Great Irish Famine, so Ireland was battling against starvation and poverty and emigration at the time. And landlords were the only people with the economic and political influence to help the distress of the poor around the time of the famine. Now, many landlords didn't rise to the task, but Cornelius O'Brien was one of the great exceptions. He managed to secure government funding to enhance the educational opportunities of his people. He also secured funding to improve local infrastructure, and this helped connect the area surrounding townlands. He provided year-round employment to locals who worked on his huge estate, and he also provided financial assistance to tenants to improve their farms. And that last bit is quite interesting because back during those times, landlords were often quite mean to their tenants. They'd evict tenants who couldn't afford to pay rent. So one thing to note about Ireland back then is while it in general was going through a state of misery, this area was actually starting to flourish thanks to Cornelius O'Brien.
This wall was an idea of Cornelius O'Brien. He said to the local guy that was building the tower for him in 1835 that he was going to build a wall to be a mile long, 6 foot high, 2 inches in thickness. So the builder said there's no wall that'll be 2 inches in thickness going to stand up with the weather you're going to get here. But Cornelius had a different idea, that he was going to put a bank at the far side of the flagstone, and he'd sink them into the ground maybe 12 inches. So the bet was that he'd do the wall, and the guy building the tower would have to do £200 worth of work on the tower to pay him back the bet. And Cornelius won the bet because he put the wall here. That's how the wall became known as the wall, to protect the people from being blown over the cliffs.
Hi, we're just standing here at the top close to OBriens Tower. Now this tower here on my left was built by Cornelius O'Brien back in 1835. Now all the infrastructure you'll see in this area was mainly responsible by Cornelius O'Brien. He was a member of the British Parliament for 20 years, and he was obviously able to get the funding for the various infrastructure parts. Now further down the road, he also built and renovated St. Bridget's Well. He renovated the rustic seating where people could sit and reflect, and he also renovated the well house. Now, there's a story told that at one stage, Cornelius O'Brien wasn't very well, and somebody brought holy water from this well, and apparently it cured him. And ever since, people have been coming in huge numbers to visit St. Bridget's Well. And about a mile down the road, he also built a rustic structure there, a reliever well, where people would stop off to basically replenish for themselves, for fresh water for their animals and for themselves. And I'm sure it was a place of regalia where people exchange different stories. Quite close to that as well, he was also responsible for building a national school down the road. It was built in 1845, and obviously he saw the importance of educating the local people, that they would have a certain standard of education to assist them on their route through life. Again, funding coming from the British government, he was able to build O'Brien's Bridge, which was a major piece of infrastructure, commissioned in 1833 and finished in 1836. Now, failure to have not built that bridge would have meant that locals would have to travel maybe up to 15 kilometres of a circuit to transact business in the business town in Ennistimon. So that was a major piece of infrastructure, and many of us pass through that bridge every day, and it's still intact today. So he made a huge contribution to this area in terms of infrastructure. He's left an indelible mark in this whole area as well. And further down the road, of course, he built his own mansion there, Birchfield House, in 1816, which is a real palatial, fabulous building, surrounded by huge birch trees. And there again, he dined and wined many of his guests there.
So welcome folks to an area here known as Isle na Shark. Now Isle na Shark is an Irish phrasing, and it means leaping falls. Now, how it got its name? Well, there's a bit of mythology and a bit of history behind that. When St. Patrick came to Ireland, he brought Christianity, and it said he drove out the snakes. Now, the snakes in question is more symbology. It was for paganism, and back then people worshipped the two-headed Danann, the children of the goddess Danu, known as divine people, and nowadays we even construe them to be related to the fairy folk. Think leprechauns or side that live in the trees. The cliff range here was called the Leaping Falls because it's said that the two-headed Danann people, when St. Patrick brought Christianity, they fled to the underground, which was a series of caves along the Doolin and further inland area. Now, a couple of years passed and the two-headed Danann ventured out, although they were very skittish about venturing forth into a land that had embraced Christianity, so they decided to disguise themselves as white foals. When they rode out from their actual cave, the underworld, They rode towards the cliffs, and as the sun was setting, they were blinded by the light, and it said they toppled over this cliff range here. Hence it became known as Leap of the Foals, or the Cliffs of the Leaping Foals. So that's where the mythology of the Leap of the Foals comes from, an Isle na Shark.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Cliffs. My name is Gerard Morrissey. Just going to talk about a few interesting things. The local national school here, St. Bridget's Well National School, up and running in 1846. 216 students, 110 girls, 106 boys, one teacher. And you might say, God, that won't be much education, but it certainly was. Previous to that, the only education you might have would be something like a hedge school, or something that would be done in some shed or in somebody's kitchen, and it might only be for a few weeks or a month or two of the year, and that might be the only education those children would get. But once we had the formal education, the National Schools Act was passed in the House of Commons in the 1830s, 1831, 1832. However, it wasn't until the late 1800s that schools started to become numerous. The side of the country I live about 10-15 miles from here, 1860 or so, 1865, the earliest national schools. But here we see one, 1846, much earlier. And again, that was due to Cornelius' influence. Cornelius wasn't afraid of education, and I think it was the most important thing that he did for this area. The building is still there. The school building is still intact, as it were. Today it's now an Airbnb. Sleeps about 8 people, as it were. But the facade, from the outside, it still looks like, and it still has the plaque. And as you go in, of course, you know, education was segregated at the time. So boys went to one side, girls to the other. And as I understand as well, like we can't see it right now, even the schoolyard would have been divided at the time. There'd be the girls and the boys.
So just behind me here is an area known as Hags Head, near the far end of the cliffs. Locals know it as Hags Head. And by a hag, I mean a witch. And the story goes that an old hag called Mal fell in love with an Irish warrior called Cuchulainn. Now Cuchulainn didn't return his feelings to Mal. He found her advances very distasteful, so Mal was outrageously crazy because of this, and she decided to chase Cuchulainn. And the chase went wildly all along the Clare coastline, all around the county, over mountains, through the burn, until they reached a local place called Loop's Head. And Mal was convinced she finally had Cuchulainn cornered there at Loop Head. But Cuchulainn, being a remarkably strong warrior, managed to leap from sea stack to sea stack all the way back to the Cliffs of Moher. And Mal tried to follow him once again, but her, not being as nimble on her footing, slipped on a sea stack and dashed against the side of the cliffs to a gruesome death. And they say her blood flowed throughout the Atlantic Ocean, and the cliffs took on the formation of her face. Now Milltown Malbay is also said to be named after her, because apparently her blood flowed as far as there. A bit of a gruesome story, but sure, it is all enjoyable. Thank you.
Well, here we are at the Cliffs of Moher, beautiful sunny day in April on the Wild Atlantic Way. Here we have the signal for the Wild Atlantic Way. Place is looking wonderfully with the greenery. This time of year, everything just starting to bloom. In fact, we have the scurvy grass right here. It's just beginning to bloom now, and today being such a fine day and this time of year, we have a southeasterly wind. Not normal here. We normally have a predominantly westerly wind blowing in from the sea. And just to prove that with the scurvy grass, the seed has been taken in the wind in here and different places around the site, and you can see where there are growth. Just down here we have the scurvy grass taking growth up through the grid. Also between the joints in the flags in different places, and it's just blooming here. Normally if you had the usual traffic this might not happen because it would be trampled on. And as you can see all around the cliffs, everything is so peaceful, not a sound. You can hear the birds singing in the distance.
So welcome folks to an area known as the Central Platform or the Ledge. From this location here you can see the sweeping cliff range that leads all the way down to the peninsula known as Hags Head. Now to understand the Cliffs of Moher is to tell a story of how the cliffs were formed over 320 million years ago during a period known as the Upper Carnivorous period. Back 320 million years ago, we were in far better climate than we are now, closer to Brazil. We can tell that when we look at the stone, the fossilization of coral along the rock and the stone. Now, the cliffs themselves was part of a large river delta near that southern equator in a large landmass. Now, each layer was formed as silt poured out of the river delta. As you look along the cliff ranges, you will see ledges and various rock faces that were formed over those 320 million years, and each of those is a chapter in the story of how the cliffs was formed. Now, some of these ledges and these areas known as stratification would be siltstone, sandstone, and Numerian shale. Now, in modern times, we can see birds such as fulmars, kittiwakes and other gulls who nest all year round here, and it's quite a popular spot for them to get away from predators and have access to where they feed in the sea.
We are here at the centre platform at the Cliffs of Moher. Along the pathway we got flagstone put up first in 1835 to protect people from being blown off the cliffs. These flagstones are quarried in local quarries if you were to walk back to Hags Head, which is back at the far out headland. Different farmers on the walkway back have got land coming up to the cliffs, and on that they find these flagstones and they quarry them. And as they're quarrying them, they look for joints on the rock so that they can cut them into different lengths. The joints on the rock are called salt joints. This is one here running along this flagstone, and when they tap that, it cuts in a straight line. These were used long before modern technology of diamond tip blades, which we can see here on this one here where the flagstone was cut with the modern diamond tip blade. This is cut with the natural salt joint by tapping it with a hammer, and it cuts in a straight line every bit as good as the diamond tip blade cuts it. When they'd be quarrying them, they'd look for what they call a free bed, and they'd take out a chunk of rock. It might be 15 foot long by 10 foot wide, and then they'd look for the joints on the face and the end of the rock so that they'd be able to take it out with wedges and different thicknesses. It will go from 2 inches to 1.5 inch, 1/4 and 1 inch. And the rock was also used for slating houses. And if you were back in a village of Kilconnell near Hags Head, you can see the houses were roofed there with this flagstone. And on the flagstone you got this trail. It's called the meandering trail of the unknown mollusca worm. These were creatures that mined their way through the silt before 319 to 320 million years ago, when this was silt at the base of this large delta system which formed the Cliffs of Moher. It's similar to the basking shark of today. As he swims along with his mouth open, he's taking in the water, and he's taking the nutrients and the plankton from the water, and the water goes through him. These creatures acted the same way. They took in the silt and it passed through them, and they took the nutrients from the silt. So That's the pattern on this, and this one here we've got a nice wavy pattern, like when you walk the beach, and sometimes you'll see little waves have created little humps on the sand, and it's here on this flagstone. And on this one here is calmer waters created this little pattern on this one.
Hi, my name is Mike and I'm here at the cliffs today. You can see the Cliffs of Moher right behind us, but we're in a little area, little paddock, little triangle area up here where there's an awful lot of species of plant and invertebrates and all sorts of birds that go unnoticed by the general public when they come here. So during these times we're taking the opportunity, and it's a golden opportunity actually, to sort of throw some quadrats down and do a little bit of environmental monitoring. So taking the opportunity today to throw this little quadrat down here. It's as you can see, it's a very simple piece of equipment. It's just 1 meter square, and it's got some little divisions in it, and that allows us to count the species. And I use my little book here, and I use my little pencil and paper, and we just note down exactly what we see. And it's unusual. Lots of people don't ever take the time to look at a square meter of ground, but today we have done, and we've recorded about 13 or 14 species in here, from yellow vetch, this one here, to some lovely little rushes, some soft rushes, to thistles, to 3 different types of grass, and all this lovely plantain that you can see here. Kids often pick this stuff and throw it up at each other, and that's actually a plantain. It's a common soft plantain, which is a lovely little species. And the birds around here, we've got meadow pipits flying behind us here, we've got skylarks, we've got all manner of birds that have come back, and they're really utilizing this quiet time here at the cliffs to sort of to make their mark again and recolonize the place.
Hi, I'm Bridget. We're here on the south platform today looking at the birds. They're starting to arrive here. They've been coming since late February, early March. They nest here. This is a conservation area for birds, and the puffins have arrived here, and they're very distinguished in their features. They have got a distinguished beak, and they have orange legs. The puffins to be up in the North Atlantic Sea at the winter time, and they arrive there and they spend the winter there. So when the puffins come back, they nest down here on this goat island, and they come back to the same nest every year. They mature and they come nesting when they're about 5 years of age. They live for about 20 years. They arrive in pairs. So when they lay their egg, the male goes out and the female, they take it in turns of guarding the nest to get the food. They actually share their duties amongst them. The guillemots lay their eggs on the sea sack or else on the ledges of the cliffs. They're all over the cliffs, and they lay an egg. It's usually an oval shaped egg, and it's a bit bigger than a hen's egg. And the reason why there's a bit of an edge to it is in case it rolls off, it doesn't break, so it stays there. So yeah, and they come here every year as well. There's about 60,000 birds coming here. We have the choughs. They're part of the crow family, and they're a small little, like a blackbird, with a red beak and red legs. We also have fulmars. They're part of the gull family. They come here as well to lay their eggs. Their distinctive feature is the way they glide across the air, and they dive down to get the fish, to get food for their young.